in 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Devos Outdoor, your go-to source for lightweight, portable, and versatile lighting solutions built for the outdoors and beyond. Whether you need scene lighting for public safety emergencies or reliable area lighting for your campsite, Devos has you covered. Their LED lanterns offer variable outputs and color options with Bluetooth remote controls that provide a complete ecosystem of lighting in a compact and easy-to-deploy package. These lights are perfect for camping, hunting, search and rescue, crime scene processing, and nighttime operations. Devos optimizes your experience and alleviates your pain points with extra power banks, solar panels, and more. Devos Outdoor ensures that you have long-lasting portable lighting no matter where you are. Check out their lineup at Devos, D-E-V-O-S, outdoor.com or find them on Amazon. Again, that's Devos, D-E-V-O-S, outdoor.com. This episode was also brought to you by Loa Boots. Start your day off on the right foot with footwear that was designed for those who stand relentlessly in the face of adversity. I wear Loa every single day, for miles on canine searches and for hours on tactical operations in inclement weather. No matter what, Loa keeps me moving. Whether you run, hike, hunt, or fight, on the streets or out in the woods, Loa has the gear you need to help you conquer whatever challenges you face. Go check out their new line of trail running shoes at Loa Boots, L-O-W-A boots.com, and get outside for some fresh air and daylight. Loa, for those who know where they're going and won't stop until they get there.
I have had a busy month at work. Like, maybe not the busiest month I've ever had, but it's top 3, top 5, right? And the phrase bandwidth comes up a lot. And often it's like in a staff meeting, and some commander will be like, well, we don't have the bandwidth for that. And what they're really saying is like, we're busy. We have not enough people. We have too many things to do. We're task saturated. And, the commanders love to talk about, are we going to do more with less? Are we going to do less with less? And at some point, I just need a commander to make a gosh darn decision. And so I had a meme that I was sharing around with the guy from Big Lebowski being like, if I hear the word bandwidth one more time, and he's like cocking his 1911. And I decided that Mike and I should probably do an episode about bandwidth and what it means in a tactical sense or an operational sense or maybe in a strategic sense. So when I think about bandwidth,
and also what it means for life.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And we will come around to that at some point. But your life is the sum of things you choose to pay attention to. That's important. That's maybe big philosophical. Your life is the sum of things you choose to pay attention to. And we can multitask, but attention ultimately is a zero-sum endeavor. You only have so much attention. You only have so many hours in the day. You only have so many things that your little ape brain can keep track of at a time, right? And you have to prioritize what gets your attention. Now, some listener is going to fact check me on using the word bandwidth. Like, well, if that's an electrical engineering term, and we're talking about a certain part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and yeah, that is a definition of bandwidth, but that's not the colloquial definition, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of those, we maybe stole the term. I mean, I think about to my upbringing, my growing up before Google, right? Before internet was a thing. And so maybe we've stolen that term to make sense of what we really mean. But one of the things, if you think about, and we're going to pick this apart as we go, we've got lots of analogies in this episode, I feel like we've kind of talked about. But one of the things that occurs to me in terms of describing bandwidth is you think about a highway, like a freeway, and how many lanes there are on the freeway, and just the capacity of that freeway to move cars from A to B. And similarly in life or at work, moving information or tasks and getting them from A to B, the more lanes you have on that highway, the higher the capacity to do work and things. And so what we're talking about is sort of managing that and engineering that.
And some people have big old superhighways, and some people have bumpy old dirt roads.
Yeah.
And some organizations, the way they're structured, have 16-lane highways.
Yeah.
I mean, some organizations are bumpy old dirt roads.
Right? There's I could think of several little small businesses, a butcher shop, a deli, I don't know, like the little hole in the wall restaurants that you might go to. And you look at the way that they're run, and it's not terribly efficient. Like the food is good, right? But they can't handle the demand that like a major chain or corporation can handle, like say In-N-Out Burger or Starbucks.
Yeah,
right. Like,
or they're fine until they get busy.
Right. And that's kind of what I mean is that like, you know, you think about like Starbucks, like McDonald's is a good example. They have the money to pour in actual research to figure out how to make a drive-through work the most efficiently. And I'm not saying that any given McDonald's has the best drive-through in the world, but if you look at big picture, like, I don't know if McDonald's invented drive-throughs, but like they're pretty prominent in that space, I would say.
Another example is like Disneyland, right? Like the way they handle lines. You're going to stand in line at Disneyland, but Disneyland has thought about exactly how much line you're willing to stand in and still pay them $1,000 to be there, right?
Yeah, crazy. So bandwidth applies in a lot of, I guess, domains in life, right? And I think in life is probably the first place to start. When I think about having bandwidth in my life, just time management is a big part of that. How much time I give to work versus life, like work-life balance. That's a bandwidth problem. Emotional bandwidth. If you think about like family drama that goes on and how much time you have to dump into family drama, right? Financial bandwidth is simply a budgeting problem, but it's also something that gets factored into the rest of your life, right? Like what can you afford and not afford, and where the checks and balances in that. And I've got a good example for that we'll talk about later on. But one of the big things is just where you put your time, energy, attention, and focus. And when I think about that, a lot of it boils down to just boundary setting. And one of the things Jim and I have been talking about a bunch lately is like the different buckets of your life, right? You've got relationship buckets, you've got work buckets, you've got financial stuff, you've got life stuff, you've got everything outside of that. Parenting, in my case, is a big one. And having a place mentally in life for like, where can I put this thing? this task or this
the back burner
drama, yeah, like this piece of drama or whatever. Like, where can I set this? Like, is this a today problem or is this a tomorrow or a next week problem? I think that's a big factor for me, and that comes up a lot with work, right? Like,
I think we might have talked about this in other episodes, but a related analogy is like you're juggling, right?
Yes.
And some of the things you're juggling are bouncy. And you can drop them and they'll be okay. And some of the things you're juggling are glass. And if you drop them, they will shatter.
That's
right?
a great, yeah.
And
I like that.
Like, how many of your kids' soccer practices can you miss?
Well, and there's also like, to go with the juggling analogy, right? Like if you could juggle 2 or 3 balls at a time, that's okay, right?
Yeah.
And let's say you're capable, maybe like you can do 4 or 5, but then it starts to get sketchy, right? like your risk factor goes up, like the chance of you dropping the ball on something increases,
or dropping all of them increases, right?
Right. And so there's also that side of it, which I really like the aspect of what you said, which is some you can handle dropping and some you can't. But I also think it's important to just note like how many balls are in the air at a time. Yeah. And sometimes that's just a factor.
And I started out with like how many of your kids' soccer practices can you miss? You can miss one, and that doesn't make you the worst dad ever.
Yeah.
Right. If you miss all of them, that's an issue, right? So you gotta think about which things can you drop once and what things can you keep dropping. Right?
Yeah. Where that line is squishy, and that's a lot harder. So that's the life stuff. But what about like tactical situations?
When I think about bandwidth in a tactical situation, a lot of it comes down to comm, as in communications.
Yeah.
Think about, clear the air for the radios, right? There's one channel, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, sometimes you can switch channels. But in the initial reaction to a crisis, usually everyone's on one, hopefully. And you gotta think about being accurate, brief, and clear on the radios and not gumming them up with a bunch of information that doesn't matter, right? So that I think is the first thing that should like occupy our discussion when it comes to tactical application of this bandwidth concept. Another one is, where do you put your attention in a fight, So one I always come back to is like, where do your eyes go? Do you look at the person's eyes or do you look at their hands? And sometimes they're trying to distract you, right? And you have to have the common sense and the judgment to recognize when someone's trying to pull your attention away.
And sometimes it's not even common sense, right? It's conditioned. It's part of training.
Yeah.
And you learn, I mean, we have this debate frequently in SWAT, like CQB, building clearing discussions, where we used to talk about sort of a triaging analogy that, or not analogy, but a model that we would use. We'd say assholes, bodies, open doors, closed doors, right? In terms of threat areas, it's assholes, bodies, open doors, closed doors. And so
I'm trying to turn that into like a dating analogy.
yeah. So like, if you see a guy that's like a military-aged male,
yeah.
right, that's like, looks like a fighter,
yeah.
versus Nana with a walker,
yeah,
right? Like the asshole over just the body.
It's cool until you catch a cloncha in the face, right?
That's yeah, that's true. Fair. But there is a difference, right? And then if you have the difference between like, I know there's a person in that room versus just an open door, I don't know that there's anyone, there could be someone in there, but I don't know, right? And then a closed door versus an open door, self-explanatory, right? So I think about it kind of in that sense in terms of sorting through the problem a little bit, but where this kind of rubber meets the road on this, a good analogy for it is just triage, right? And most people think of triage, they think of mass casualty incidents. They think of multiple patients that are overwhelming the resources available to treat those patients in a medical kind of sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and triage literally means to sort, right? You're putting things in the three piles.
Yeah, so if you think about the piles of, in a emergency medical trauma sense, if you think of most mass casualty incidents, you have your immediate, your delayed, which can wait a minute, and like your walking wounded. And there's a fourth if you say like deceased or expectant, which is they're not dead yet, but we don't have the resources to help them, to keep them alive. So they're going to probably die, right? So you could say 4 in that sense, but the ones that really matter are those 3 and how you sort them. But when I think about bandwidth in terms of managing a problem like that, triaging is important, right? Like if you think about what we're saying, life, work, the things that could come up, and you have to sort of triage and sort what things do I have to do first and prioritize. That's one thing, right? But when I take the emergency medical side of that and expand it, I think about 5-meter targets, right? So one of my big challenges in life is like my planning horizon always tends to be on like a week or two. Like I can't think too much farther ahead.
I have friends who are like, hey, Jim, do you want to go to Switzerland with me in like a year and a half?
Yeah, ask me.
I need you to decide today whether you can buy the plane ticket. And I'm like, I have no idea.
Ask
where
me
I'm
in
gonna be
16 months and we can talk about
if that.
Yeah, I mean, so like that planning horizon is one of those things, right? And like I think about this often with tasks that come up on the business side of things, with the podcast, as it comes to not just work stuff, but also just house, like, oh, this task that I want to do before it gets too hot outside or too cold outside. And then I look up and it's September or May, and I'm like, well, shit, like now I'm behind the curve, right? So triage is necessary not only in the urgency side of things. It's one thing to take the people in a mass casualty scenario and sort them into one of those 3 piles, but there's also a short, medium, long-term side of that has to occur.
Yeah, I have a couple things on that. One thing related to triage is the concept of life over limb, right? Like at some point you have to accept real cost in order to save your situation, right? So life over limb is sometimes a literal thing. Back in the day when tourniquets weren't as developed as they are now and emergency surgery wasn't as developed as it is now, it was assumed if you put a tourniquet on someone, they were going to lose the limb downstream, right? Yeah. Not necessarily true these days, but not true either, right? In, I think, the millennial and Gen Z and Gen Alpha construct, we have not had to make that many compromises in our lives. We have been raised, I think, maybe with poor expectations.
Yeah.
About we can be everything and we should have all the things and we shouldn't have to accept any costs to do all the things we want to do.
Yeah. You can have your cake and eat it too.
And life just ain't that way. This isn't Burger King. You can't have it your way. And you can be anything, but you can't necessarily be everything to everyone all the time, right? So you have to be willing to accept costs. And this, and especially on the 5 meter target thing, this is where leaders or on-scene commanders make you money. Like we talked in a recent episode of like, why do we even have officers, military officers? Well, this is one of those places. I hate the argument about leaders versus managers. I think it's lazy. We need both. I need a leader who can manage and a manager who can lead. I need someone who knows how to triage what's urgent, what's important, and provide clarity to the troops about this is the thing I need you to do right now. This is your 5 meter target.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to be able to do both.
I think the having your cake and eat it too analogy is important. And this will come up again later when we talk about like budgets.
Yeah. This is why I don't do boxer briefs and I don't do Ospreys.
But when we talk about budgets and staffing cuts and things like that, like this is like having the cut cake and eat it too. I think that's an important point, and I think your jokes are funny. So, so going back to the operational stuff, when we talk about triaging and mass casualty, right? It's one thing to put people in the bucket of immediate, delayed, walking wounded, deceased, or expectant, right? Like that's one side of it. That's the 5 meter target, the 5 meter task, the one that's right in front of your face. And one thing I think is important when it comes to bandwidth is zooming out and being able to look at that short, medium, and long-term aspect of it, right? And so if I go with that mass casualty example, it's one thing to sort patients into life threats and viability, but it doesn't stop there, right? You or someone at that scene or involved in that incident still have to account for the hospitals, plural, in the area, not just the one hospital, the one trauma center, but all the hospitals that are going to receive those patients that you have coming and their capacity to handle them. In other words, you can't send all of the patients to one hospital, right? Just because you have the scene sorted out doesn't mean that fixes the hospital's problem, right? There's a bottleneck there potentially. And with that is also the transportation of those patients. All right. You've got them all sorted out, but how do you get them there? Right? You still have a limited number of air assets, ground assets to get them from point A to point B. And there might be some capacity to treat people on scene, right? In place, but that's going to be limited as well in terms of not only the quantity that they can handle, but the capabilities of the people out there.
Yeah. There's a little literary foreshadowing here. What can I do in the meantime, right? What can I do while we're waiting for transportation? And this is where having some strategic thinking helps, right? You can visualize the stocks and flows of what it is you're trying to do. I have a pile of patients here in this field or in this freeway. And if all I do is throw them in the back of a van and drive them all at once over to the ER, I'm just putting a pile of patients at the door of the ER, right? And so if you can visualize that a little bit or call in resources that can help you sort where they need to go, you're not going to bottleneck quite so bad.
Yeah, and one of the things on this is, and we'll touch on this a bit later, but that doesn't mean that all of those tasks have to be handled by one person or one group. You can divvy that out, and that's sort of the essence of teamwork, right? But the idea is identifying where some of those like bottlenecks or choke points are and how you can work together to resolve some of those issues, right? Different people and different groups can work together to solve that problem.
So one concept I want you to think about is what is urgent, what is important, and then what is just loud. And like a classic scenario that I've seen in like first responder trainings is like there's one person on the floor like bleeding, and then there's a loud screaming hysterical woman like help me,
very, right? Very classic, yeah.
And what we're training the student to do is recognize that just because you're screaming doesn't mean you're hurt.
Right.
Or hurt enough to justify attention. Right.
Now, the classic of this is like the guy with a broken arm or broken leg is not going to die.
Yeah.
The guy choking on his own blood, like just sitting him up or turning him into like a recovery position where that blood can drain out, right? And he might not be making any noise because he's not breathing real good, but just positioning him well might be a life-saving move. Whereas the guy with the broken arm, don't get me wrong, I accept that it hurts a lot, but they're probably not going to die because of it.
Yeah, if you're screaming, you're breathing, right?
Yeah.
So one thing on this is comes up at work, right? I have a busy office schedule. I'm an officer. I do office tasks, and I'm constantly trying to sequence my workflow through the day. I've got to knock out a bunch of stuff. And the dudes I work with, bless their hearts, they're charismatic, friendly. They want to come have a conversation, and they want to lead, and they want my help with things. And so they just roll up onto my desk and they're like, hey, Jim, we want to do this and this and this. And then in the middle of that conversation, I'll take a phone call. Hey, Jim, we want to do this and this and this. And I'm like, guys, I love you, but I need you to send me a goddamn email. And they're like, oh, no, we don't lead by email. I'm like, cool, but I have to sequence you. And when you just roll up on my desk, you're jumping the line.
Yeah.
Right. And they're loud, but they're not necessarily urgent or important a lot of the times. And I have to have the maturity to recognize that and force them into the sequence, even if they don't want to, even if that kind of makes me a jerk. Right.
This can come up in not only a professional sense like Jim is describing, but also in a personal, just life sense. And one of the things in my life that has been helpful in sorting that out in terms of decision-making and to-do lists is called the Eisenhower matrix. You can Google this. This is the thing that I guess Eisenhower used.
Picture like a quad chart.
Yeah.
Right?
So like a four square. And if you think about the four square, on one side of the matrix is the urgent things, and on one side is the not urgent things, so time sensitive or not. And then on the left side are the things that are important and the things that are not important. So an example of this might be, let's say in life, something that is time sensitive, so it's urgent in that it has some sort of deadline, but not necessarily important in the grand scheme of things. The first thing that comes to mind to me is trash day. If I want my trash to get taken out, like, well, that's Monday. And so Sunday night, the trash can's got to go out, right? Like, is it the end of the world if I miss trash day? No, like my car's not going to get repossessed. I'm not going to foreclose on my house, but I will have to deal with extra trash for the day, right? So it is not necessarily super important, but the urgency, the time sensitivity might be a little bit higher, right? And so if you Google this, you can see this is just a model that you can use to help with your decision making, but it breaks sort of those tasks into four squares, the things that are important and also urgent, which you need to do, versus the things that are important but not urgent, and then you need to decide. Maybe that means picking when you need to do it, or planning for it a little bit better. They are important, but they're not necessarily time sensitive, right? Or as time sensitive. And then there's the things that are urgent, but not necessarily important. And I can delegate that. Maybe I can ask for some help. And what comes to mind for me again is that a chore for my kid? Is that something I ask my sister for help for? Right? It might be something that it is urgent and time sensitive, but not so important that it needs all of my time and attention, right? And then the things that are not important and not urgent, maybe I just don't do. Maybe I just delete those from my to-do list and hey, I don't have the bandwidth for that. And that's part of boundary setting, right? But the Eisenhower matrix, I think, is something that speaks well to what Jim is describing between the loud problem versus the actually urgent or important problems.
Yeah. Another thing to consider with this is literal bandwidth. We talked a little bit about clearing the air on the radio. There are only so many frequencies, only so many channels, only so many screens in a war room. And like even my email inbox, like I just talked about email, and I'm an officer. That's what I do.
Very, very important
I
stuff.
do emails. But I've had a couple instances lately where we're in the middle of a crisis spin up for whatever the thing is that day. And we're sending big files back and forth, pictures, maps, charts, concepts of operation that we're trying to get approved. And in the middle of it, some random helpful guy will send his like weekly newsletter and it's 18 megabytes and it kills my inbox. And so we've got all this operational stuff that is now not moving because this one guy wanted to send his newsletter out. And he should have had the common sense not to do that. And his boss should have had the common sense to tell him not to do that, right? I've seen a lot of things like that. Recently, I was visiting an Air Force unit, and they had a very critical operational mission that wasn't going well. They were underprepared and overwhelmed by the situation. And I was trying to help them out. And I go in to help them out, and they're doing a blues uniform inspection. And I'm like, man, I wonder where all of your attention is going right now.
I'm just glad those measurements are right. You know?
Yeah, and I get it. We're in the military.
Straight.
Yeah, we're in the military. We got to do military stuff. Totally understand. But don't drop the airplane to fly the radio, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I love that. So when I think about, again, in terms of analogy, right? Like we stole the quote unquote bandwidth idea from essentially the internet, right? Yep. But I think it's useful because in the sense that people often don't have a good model for how much they can handle, there are people I know that get overwhelmed by not a lot. And there are people that can handle a lot of things, but even them, sometimes they pile too much on their plate or they juggle too many balls. We talked about that, so to speak, right? So if you think about it in terms of like IT networks or like the internet, there are only so many cables, and those cables can only handle so many like megabytes or gigabytes per second. And one of the big things for me is like, do you actually know what those limits are? And for people that talk about bandwidth, it's a very like abstract idea. There's no like number of tasks that they can handle or not handle.
But you can tell when they're overwhelmed. You can tell when they're a lieutenant under mental pressure, right?
Yeah. And so like that's kind of the thing, right? Like when it comes to the internet, people just typically log on and they just have good internet or they don't, right? Or they don't have to think about the demand on their system. And so what are your troubleshooting steps? Do you have like a checklist or a system when things are getting bogged down or your internet's running slow? Like, is it just reset your router? Or do you actually start to look at things like, well, there's choke points and bottlenecks in this system, right? There's the limitations on the technology itself, right? Maybe you have fiber optic in your area or not, and there's a geography component to that, certain levels of service to certain areas. Your internet service provider can only provide what they can provide, and then your modem or your router or your Wi-Fi at your home or office can only do so much. Your device can only handle so much. And so there's bottlenecks and choke points in that system. And so how does that apply to life? How do you identify and open those gates or figure out where you need better limitations on what amount of data you can handle at one time? And I think that's a big part of this is, again, like the term bandwidth is understanding where your limits are and where you have to like set a boundary and be like, nope, this is not one of those things I can handle. Earlier, when I talked about in life, one of the things I said was like work-life balance. And one example of this that I'm very guilty of is like, why are you checking your work email on your days off? You're not getting paid for that.
Well, I don't want to get overwhelmed on my days on. That stresses me out more, right?
And for the same reason, I check my work emails on days off because it limits the number of things that I have to do when I'm at work. But it's one of the things to think about in terms of like, if you are struggling in life, where do you check out on some level? Right?
I would also offer, especially if you're a habitual phone checker, which I am, and I know for a fact Mike is.
Oh, yeah.
Consider that your phone has trained you to do that.
Yeah.
Right. For a lot of reasons. And the people on the other side of your phone have trained you to do that.
Including the email providers.
The email providers, but also the person sending you the email, the person sending you the text. And whether that's work email or family, right? There are some people who are going to take your attention because they can, because you let them.
So if you think about these boundaries and limitations on bandwidth and all of that, and you try to apply it to like an operational sense, running a call in public safety or a military operation, I imagine is very similar. Consider, in terms of those limitations, the bottlenecks, right? One analogy that I think is kind of useful for talking about bandwidth has to do with electricity. And so if you think about like electrons flowing through a cable or a wire, right? There are three basic forces at play. There's the voltage, which is the pressure of electrons to get through a circuit. There's the resistance applied, which is as electrons move, it gets bogged down by certain things. And then there's also the amperage, which is the amount of electrons that can make it through a gate, if you will, right? And so if you think about like all of those factors that can play into it, where does momentum get slowed down or stuck, right? Is there not enough motivation or pressure to push whatever message or task through? Is there not enough of a highway, the amperage or the current, enough lanes on the freeway to get it through? Or is there too much resistance that's causing a bottleneck or things to get bogged down, right? Where does that momentum get stuck or slowed down? So one thing that happens in an operational sense is you need permission for something. And so I get on the radio or a phone call or an email and I ask for permission, and that guy or gal might not get back to me. They don't respond. They're busy. They're overwhelmed. They're task saturated, whatever it is. And so like
the email's just real slow.
Right.
That happened to me today.
I believe it. But those are the sorts of things that like, well, I would act on this, but I can't because I'm stuck in this spot, right? And there are times where a bottleneck might be good. Maybe we need to slow things down. Maybe we need to ask for permission in an operational sense.
You need a warrant, for example. That's by design,
yes.
Right?
That's a great example, actually. But it can also hinder efficiency and effectiveness. And I think that's the thing you have to think about in terms of operational bandwidth is where you're getting sped up and slow down.
Yeah. So a couple things about this. I want you to think about the phrase wrapped around the axle.
Ooh, I love that.
Or heat-seeking missiles like a Sidewinder tracking onto the sun, right? Like, man, I know some people who can get freaking distracted. We hire a lot of ADHD kids, right? And when I think about a typical workday or a meeting, when you're a leader or a commander or whatever, supervisor, one of the things you have to do is keep the group on task and recognize when we are going into a discussion that isn't helping us get to the target, right? So are we getting wrapped around the axle? Are we burning too much attention on a thing that isn't helping us right now, right? And relatedly...
real quick on that, like the time sensitivity, I think, is important on that.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like there are times to
go down the rabbit hole,
to slow down and problem solve and be like, well, hold on, let's actually explore this. And then there's times to be like, hey, this is like, we don't have time for this.
So that's actually a great segue into my next point, which is the difference between perfect and fucking good enough.
Yeah.
Right. So this is an area where Mike and I actually complement each other really, really well.
True.
Mike is an optimizer. He will sit there and try to tweak the levels until they're exactly perfect. And I will get you to about a 50% solution and I'll call it good. And you need to know that about yourself, which one you are, and you need to recognize, is this a scenario where we need just good enough, right? Load and go, throw them in the back of the car and let's go to the hospital. Or is this a thing like, hang on, pump the brakes?
This is a zero fail scenario.
Yeah.
And we have to win this.
Yeah. So where do we need to slow it down and get it right? And I used to work in rescue. And when I think about rescuing someone in a military context, I want to get there, grab them, and get the hell out, right? Except the bad guys know that. And so a rescue package is very vulnerable. Right? They already shot down one guy and now they know that. They know his bros are coming, right? And so it is doctrinally, you want to sit and wait and get set and set up your guerrilla package and then you go get your guy.
Yeah.
Right? And that works.
Because then they can fuck around and find out.
Yeah. And that works as long as A, you have a guerrilla package that you can assemble, B, that guy isn't bleeding out, and C, the enemy is dangerous enough for that to matter, but not so dangerous that they're going to take down your guerrilla package, right? So that's where we need leaders and operational strategists who understand where they're willing to take risks and when to speed things up and when to slow things down. And I think this is a good example of where we want to think about that. The next thing I want you to think about is the concept of parallel versus series. Mike just gave us a great rundown of electrical engineering and electrical and magnetic physics, and that was really cool of him. Thank you, Mike. So when we think about circuits, there are parallel and there are series, right?
I love this.
So I don't know anything about electricity. What I do know is that there's some tasks we can spread out among the group and do simultaneously, or effects that we can cause to the enemy simultaneously, right? I don't want to bomb you, let you recover, bomb you the next day, let you recover, bomb you the next day. No, I want all the bombs to hit all at once, okay? So think through what has to be sequenced, what has to be done before I can move on to the next step, and what things can I do right now and like just get them all done, right? And again, this is where managers matter. There is a project management tool called a Gantt chart, Gantt chart, and it is a workflow. We need to do this and this before we can do this.
There are dependencies.
Right?
Yes.
But while we're waiting for that thing to get done, we can do this and this, right? That Gantt chart's a really, really powerful tool, and especially in the military. I'll tell you why. Everyone in the military has heard the term hurry up and wait. And we've all experienced it. But here's the thing. Where and when do I want to do my waiting? Do I want to do my waiting on the close end of a trip or the far end of a trip? Think about like going to the airport. Do I want to wait in my house until the very last minute and then walk onto the plane as they're closing the door? Do I want to do my waiting at the terminal? So like the typical dad, like, let's leave 5 hours early and we'll just go sit and stare at each other at the airport, right? Think about where you want to do your waiting in your flow. Also, is there something useful I could be doing while I am waiting? And in military stuff, one of my favorites is the concept of hip pocket training. I need my NCOs and my young officers to be prepared to use wait time, because sometimes you're waiting on the plane, you're waiting on the tank, you're waiting on the armory to open up. You should have a lesson ready to go to teach your troops, some sort of mentoring, some sort of drill that you could be doing to make that time useful.
There's something about that I think in terms of bandwidth when it comes to if you work in, let's say, an organization that says like, well, we don't get enough training.
Fix it.
And it's like, well, there are opportunities. You just have to like capitalize on them, right? And so when it comes to bandwidth, if you're in a leadership capacity of any form and you have the opportunity to be like, well, I can't fix the organization problem, but I can take my guys aside for 5 minutes and teach them this. And they're that much smarter when they come out the other end, right? Like that is a bandwidth limiting or enhancing factor, right? And so when it comes to the parallel and series circuit thing that Jim talks about, and going back to the electricity thing, what we're talking about is like, do you split the voltage in a circuit to do two things at once versus do one thing at full voltage and then the other thing at full voltage in series, right? One after the other.
And picture, if we want to run with analogies, like lines at a busy, like a Walmart or a supermarket, right?
Like a queue.
And like, is it better to have everyone in one big line that splits off at the very end to the different checkers? Or is it better to have 27 checkers, each one with a line? Or, like most Walmarts, one checker and screw you.
Well, right? And that's the thing, right? It depends on the line and on the task, right? But one of the things that I love about this concept, since we're talking about it in terms of managing bandwidth and operational effectiveness, is just in the sense of like the essence of teamwork. And when I think about synergy and implicit guidance and control and communication and decentralized command and execution, all of that goes back to that the bottlenecks and the choke points, right? Discussion. If you think about internet technology and and I'm not an IT person, but like if I'm trying to manage the amount of bandwidth that one cable can handle, there are times where I got to run another cable to that problem, right? I can't, that one cable can't handle both problems or all the problems. So maybe I need more cables, right? And where I go back to is like that mass casualty scenario where someone gets on scene and they start sorting the patients, and like the fourth or fifth or seventh or ninth guy there, instead of like helping sort the patients, maybe needs to step back and say, all right, let me start calling the hospitals, or maybe start staging the air and ground assets to transport these people, to organize that side of it. And that's a parallel effort. Right?
It is. And if you've got a high performing team,
yes,
they're not going to wait to be told what to do.
Yeah.
They're going to find work, and they know what work they need to find, right? There's a priority of effort, and they know because they've drilled it, they've been trained it.
Yeah.
You're not just expecting them to read everybody's mind, but you've taught them this, right? And in a low performing team, they will sit there and be like, well, no one has ordered me into action, so I'm going to sit here and drink my Slurpee.
Well, but it goes back to like the synergy, implicit guidance and control, decentralized command. Like if you recognize that, hey, people are already, this is like the look for work concept.
Yeah.
Right? People are already sorting patients. That's happening. So now someone needs to take a step back and be like, all right, where are these patients going to go? Let me establish a casualty collection point.
Yeah.
All right. How are these people going to get to the hospital? What hospitals are they going to go to?
Start working logistics.
Right.
Start working in coordination with the hospitals. Start throwing guys in the back of a pickup truck. Start digging holes.
So these are
you got to do. Right?
These are the parallel efforts.
Yeah.
I think. And sometimes there's a time and a place to work everything in series. Like, hey, this is the only priority in an active killer scenario, for example, at the outset is to close with and kill the bad guy, to stop the killing. And then you stop the dying, right? But stop the killing first. And until that's done, nothing else matters. But as soon as it's done, you got to go to the next thing. So there's a parallel and series thing that kind of goes with that, I think.
Yeah. Mike mentioned sometimes you just need to add another cable. And I would offer a recurring theme of the last couple of weeks of Mike and me talking is we're always understaffed. We're always underfunded, right? And I would offer your manning in your agency or your military unit is probably set for steady state, if that. So what happens when you surge? Most organizations aren't manned for surge, and especially not long-term surge. What happens when you're a business day operation and suddenly you need to go to 24-hour operations? And you can do that for a couple of days, but what happens when it turns into a couple of weeks? What's your plan? And I need managers and leaders who know how to handle the surge, and they have a plan. Is it we bring in guys from the sister agency, or we hire people, or you got to do something, right? And at some point, the wheels are going to come off if you don't have a plan. And the surges will happen. Like that is part of working in the tactical world is there's going to be a shooting. There's going to be major combat. You're going to take losses.
So when it comes to steady state and surge stuff, I accept that there are much more important examples, like if you're going to take casualties at war, right? So this is a much less tactical tangent, but as it relates to backup plans and contingencies, I think they matter in life too. And if I think about bandwidth in life and backups and contingencies, just having a savings or some form of emergency fund is important. And part of that is knowing what things can be cut and which things are essential and can't be touched, right? And again, acknowledging that this is nothing remotely close to having enough soldiers to withstand casualties in war, right? Not the same thing, but one example that stands out in my mind, and this is a real like first world problem. I pay for house cleaners to come every like 4 to 6 weeks to clean my house. And in terms of like my budget, which is pretty tight, that's a pretty significant expense on my end. And on one hand, I could cut that $200 some a month and save a lot of money. And that would be super helpful. But it buys me something in terms of bandwidth and stress that exceeds the dollar amount in my budget. And I think that part's important, right? Because it is something I can easily cut if I'm strapped for cash. And I've done that in the past. I certainly have. But what I found is that the time and the emotional bandwidth that went into now having to do those tasks myself accumulated in a way that it made much more sense to just like work some overtime and pay the damn house cleaners.
So this is kind of the essence of strategy, right?
Yeah.
What are you willing to sacrifice? What are your resources? What resources are you not willing to sacrifice? And time is absolutely a critical resource.
Time is money, for sure.
Money is a critical resource, but you can sometimes trade them. Not always, but sometimes, right? What other resources do you have? Do you have a buddy you can lean on? Do you have a family you can lean on? Do you have, and you have your own concept of what your resources are, but you have to know what resources you got, and you have to put value on those resources.
Yeah. And I think where this applies to the organizational or operational discussion is it can be difficult to look past the raw numbers. And it takes a lot of time and effort to be intentional about whatever unintended consequences or less tangible consequences. Like, it might seem easy to cut the budget or the staffing out of necessity, because if you're only looking at the math itself, right? And I accept, bills don't pay themselves. That is important. When I look at my monthly budget, there's money in, money out. And at the end of the day, that either adds up or it doesn't. I totally see that. I get it, right? But when you make those cuts, there's obviously times where you can't quantify what you lose or gain from a cut, right? And in that sense, for me, I might save $207 a month by not having the house cleaners come, but what that costs me otherwise, the math doesn't work out, right? And I'm not saying that wouldn't always work out, but for me, it doesn't, right? So although it seemed like low-hanging fruit at the time, I realized it hurt my day-to-day as a single co-parent and a guy with a weird and a busy work schedule with not a lot of me time, right? I was way better off doing something else to save or make money. That might mean less coffee, less eating out, or more overtime. That was more worth it than cutting that line out of the budget and having to do all that work myself. Right. And so having the extra manpower might seem like a waste of money at the time until you realize how much you might actually need it. And so how do you justify that over the long term? Or what considerations do you make in case you might actually need those things? I think that's an important, it deserves its own conversation.
Another bandwidth concept I want you to think about is span of control. And the military's done a bunch of research on this, is how many people can one person supervise? And how many elements can one military headquarters supervise? And the answer is smaller than you might think. A typical human can keep track of 3 or 4 humans. And when it gets much more than that, your span of control is going to drop off. Your ability to communicate to them, your ability to track what they need and what you need from them is going to drop off.
It does depend a little bit on the humans, though.
Oh, for sure.
In some cases, you can handle 3 or 4, but with the right people and the right manager or leader, you can handle 7 to 9, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, I think that 3 to 7 is a magic number for sure.
And with advanced communications, sometimes that gets better, right? Common operating picture where I have Blue Force tracking, that makes things a lot better. But think about when you're setting up your little org chart for your organization, how many people can one person realistically keep track of? Okay.
And how much control they actually need.
Yeah.
I think span of control is important not only in work, but also in life. And one of the hardest things...
Yeah, don't have too many kids.
Yeah. Yeah. But one of the hardest things in life, and I think it applies in management as well, is to decipher between the things that you can, not only decipher between, but also divest from the things that you can control and the things that you cannot. And so I think about those frontline supervisor, middle manager people who, hey, your budget's your budget. And there might be a way that you can lead up and affect that on some level, but sometimes you have to work with what you got. And this goes back to triage, right? At the end of the day, it's like, hey, these are the things I can control and these are things I can't. And at some point I have to triage that and manage what is the best case scenario that I can affect here.
And let me make this blunt. You have to make a decision. The longer you go when you're overwhelmed without making a decision, the worse your situation is going to get. We talk a lot about Boyd on this podcast. There's another guy that I really like named Warden. I think he's actually still alive. And he was big on targeting and parallel effects and a lot of other things. One of his big points was time value of action. The longer it takes you to make a decision, the less value you're going to get from it.
And the less relevant it becomes.
Yeah.
Right? Because the circumstances have changed.
So think about like someone's bleeding out from their arm. The longer it takes you to think about the perfect tourniquet.
Can't do an Eisenhower matrix.
Yeah. You just got to do it, right? So make a goddamn decision. Think about, as we wrap up this podcast, think about what is eating up your time. And are the things that are eating up your time and your attention worth it? Are you tracking off or getting wrapped around an axle that doesn't freaking matter? And also think about just however your brain is wired, what you spend a lot of your cognitive effort on. And you might be surprised what you think about. What lives rent-free in your brain? Is it an ex-girlfriend? Is it a Britney Spears song? Whatever it is, be thoughtful about it, and you get a vote about what happens in your brain, right? And I want you to stop and manage what is urgent versus what is important. And if you're a leader, you owe that to your troops. You owe them clarity about priority of task and urgency of task. I think that's all I got. I think this has tactical implications, operational, strategic, and sometimes it's physical, right? It's literally how much bandwidth in the electromagnetic spectrum and how much on any given radio frequency are we gumming it up with chatter. And are you part of the chatter, or are you pushing the accurate, brief, clear message that's going to actually help save the day?
What I think, I go back to the electricity example, right? You have the amount of pressure to get things done, the current or amperage or the capacity, how many lanes on your highway, and then the amount of resistance. And in that sense, what comes to mind for me is how you manage that is also just about recognizing where you get stuck and bottlenecked. And if you're like, at the end of the day, there's only so many hours in a day, right? There are X number of hours in a day. You're trying to sleep so many of those. And it can be really hard to figure out like, well, what is a problem that I can solve or fix today versus a tomorrow or a next week problem? And you could put those off for so long, but even those start to pile up. So figure those out and set your boundaries accordingly. I think work-life balance falls into this as much as anything, but it's almost easier in an operational or tactical sense in some cases than it is for life.
Yeah, you have some clarity.
Yeah.
Right.
The priorities become like, it's like people are living or dying versus like, do I do this house chore this week or do I parent my kid this week? Those are squishier. but even in a tactical setting, as you're talking, I thought about the classic movie Patton, which is the true story of General Patton in World War II, right? And there's a classic scene where he's got a column of tanks trying to get across a bridge, and they're getting strafed by the Germans. And they're all stuck on the bridge because there's like a donkey in the middle of the bridge, and like the local villager can't get the donkey moving. And so Patton I don't want to spoil it for you. I think you should watch the movie Patton, because I think this is a classic example of understanding what was urgent right then. And sometimes you got to make tough choices. Yeah.
So be safe out there. Be smart out there. We're cheering you on.
All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by 09 Holsters. We talk a lot about people, ideas, and hardware on this show, so when we invest in equipment, we always think in terms of experience first. 09 is helping you figure out how to carry the gear you need to be effective. They are built by cops, for cops, with a minimalist design and bomb-proof durability. Radio cases, flashlights, body cameras, even canine remotes, you name it, 09 has been filling a void in tactical duty holsters for more than a decade. Go see what they offer at 09 Holsters, that's ZERO, the number 9, holsters.com. 09, built to win the fight.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by ManusX. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with ManusX. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com.
Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.